The humid air of Rabaul hung heavy over the military compound as Captain Takeshi Yamamoto reviewed the convoy manifest for the third time that morning. His fingers traced the list of 12 Type 1 Hoha armored trucks scheduled to depart at dawn, each one loaded with critical supplies destined for forward positions in New Guinea. The date was March 15, 1943, and the tide of war was beginning to turn against the empire. Takeshi had earned his reputation as one of the most meticulous logistics officers in the Imperial Japanese Army. At 32 years old, his weathered face told stories of countless supply runs through hostile territory. He had witnessed the gradual degradation of Japanese supply lines over the past year, watching as American air superiority slowly strangled their operations across the Pacific Theater. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka entered the planning room, his boots clicking sharply against the wooden floor. The young officer, barely 24, carried an urgency that made Takeshi look up from his papers. "Hiroshi, we have new intelligence from reconnaissance. American Corsair patrols have increased by 40% along Route 7. They are hunting our convoys specifically." Takeshi nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. The Type 1 Hoha trucks were supposed to be their answer to this problem. Designed by the Hino Motor Company in 1941, these armored vehicles featured reinforced steel plating, protected crew compartments, and mounted machine guns. On paper, they represented a significant advantage over unarmored transport vehicles. Yet Takeshi had seen 5 convoys lost in the past 2 months alone. 90% casualties. The numbers haunted him during sleepless nights in his quarters. Sergeant Kenji Matsuda, a veteran mechanic with grease permanently stained into his calloused hands, stood by the maintenance bay inspecting the lead vehicle. At 41, Kenji was the oldest member of the motor pool, having served since the Manchurian campaigns. He understood these machines better than anyone, but even his expertise could not overcome fundamental design limitations. "Captain, I have completed the pre-departure inspection," Kenji reported, saluting crisply. "All 12 vehicles are mechanically sound, but I must repeat my concerns about the armor configuration." Takeshi approached the truck, running his hand along the steel plating. The armor was 12 millimeters thick on the sides, 16 on the front. Adequate against small arms fire, perhaps, but woefully insufficient against modern anti-tank weapons or aerial bombardment. "Your concerns are noted, Sergeant, but our orders are clear. The garrison at Leh is running critically low on ammunition and medical supplies. Without this convoy, they cannot hold their position." Private Daichi Kobayashi, an 18-year-old driver fresh from training school in Osaka, stood nervously beside his assigned vehicle. His hands trembled slightly as he performed his equipment check. This would be his first combat supply run. His mother's last letter, still folded in his breast pocket, urged him to stay safe and return home to help with the family rice farm. The convoy formation took shape in the pre-dawn darkness. 12 Type 1 Hoha trucks arranged in a staggered column, each separated by 50 meters to minimize damage from a single attack. 4 Type 97 TK tankettes provided escort, their crews scanning the tree lines with battle-hardened vigilance. Major Ichiro Saito, the garrison commander, arrived to observe the departure. His presence was unusual, signaling the critical nature of this supply run. The major was a stern man, 50 years old, with a scar running along his left cheek from the fighting at Shanghai in 1937. "Captain Yamamoto, the success of this mission is paramount. Our forces at Leh are depending on these supplies. The Americans know our supply routes are our weakness. They will exploit any vulnerability." Takeshi saluted sharply. "We understand the stakes, Major. The convoy will depart on schedule." As the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the engines of 12 Type 1 Hoha trucks roared to life. The sound was deafening in the morning stillness, a mechanical symphony that signaled both hope and dread. Hiroshi climbed into the passenger seat of the command vehicle beside Takeshi. Through the narrow observation slit, the jungle landscape stretched endlessly before them, beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. The convoy rolled forward through the compound gates, leaving behind the relative safety of Rabaul. The road ahead wound through dense jungle terrain, across rivers swollen with seasonal rains, and past countless positions where enemy forces could lie in ambush. Kenji, driving the third vehicle in the column, muttered a quiet prayer to his ancestors. He had survived too many close calls to feel invincible. Young Daiichi, gripping his steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, tried to remember everything from his training. The mission had begun. 90% of similar convoys never reached their destination. The first 3 hours of the journey passed without incident. The convoy maintained steady progress along the coastal road, the Type 1 Ho-Ha trucks handling the rough terrain, better than the older transport vehicles would have managed. Inside the lead vehicle, Takeshi monitored radio communications while studying his tactical maps. The vulnerability became apparent at kilometer marker 73. The road narrowed considerably, forcing the convoy into a single-file formation through a mountain pass. Sheer cliffs rose on the left side while a steep drop fell away to the right, leaving no room for evasive maneuvering. Dense jungle canopy overhead limited visibility to the sky. "This is exactly where I would strike," Hiroshi observed quietly, his eyes scanning the ridgelines above. Takeshi felt the same instinctive dread. He reached for the radio handset to order increased vigilance when the first explosion tore through the morning air. The 8th truck in the column erupted in flames. A bazooka round had struck its rear axle, the shaped charge penetrating the thin bottom armor with devastating effect. The vehicle careened sideways, blocking the narrow road as ammunition inside began cooking off in secondary explosions. Ambush positions left and right. The radio crackled with panicked voices. American forces estimated company strength. The Americans had chosen their killing ground perfectly. Hidden in elevated positions along both sides of the pass, they poured fire down onto the convoy. The 12mm side armor of the Type 1 Ho-Ha trucks, adequate against rifle rounds, offered no protection against the .50 caliber machine guns and anti-tank weapons that now targeted them systematically. Kenji watched in horror as the truck ahead of him took multiple hits. Armor-piercing rounds punched through the steel plating like paper, finding the fuel tank. The driver never had a chance to escape before the vehicle was consumed in a fireball. "Return fire. Return fire," Takeshi shouted into the radio. But the mounted machine guns on the trucks had limited elevation angles. The attackers were positioned too high on the slopes for the convoy's weapons to reach effectively. Young Daiichi, driving the 6th vehicle, felt something slam into his door. The armor held, but the impact left a significant dent inches from his body. His hands shook violently on the steering wheel as tracer rounds streaked past his vision slits like deadly fireflies. The Type 97 tankettes attempted to provide covering fire, but their light armor made them equally vulnerable. Within minutes, 2 of the 4 escorts were burning wrecks. The remaining tankettes tried to maneuver but found themselves trapped by the terrain and the disabled vehicles blocking the road. 10 minutes into the ambush, 7 of the 12 Type 1 Ho-Ha trucks were destroyed or disabled. The surviving vehicles could not advance past the burning wreckage ahead, nor could they reverse quickly enough through the narrow pass. They were trapped, exactly as the Americans had planned. Through the chaos and smoke, Takeshi made a decision that defied standard military doctrine. Instead of ordering the remaining trucks to hold position and fight, he grabbed the radio with desperate urgency. "All units, abandon the vehicles. Infantry dispersal pattern into the eastern jungle. Move now." Hiroshi stared at him in disbelief. "Captain, we cannot abandon the supplies." The orders were explicit. Takeshi met his eyes with iron resolve. "Dead men deliver nothing, Lieutenant. The mission has failed. Now we save who we can." The order went against everything the Imperial Army taught about duty and perseverance, but Takeshi had witnessed enough slaughter to know when tactical retreat was the only option. The Type 1 Ho-Ha trucks, for all their armored protection, had become steel coffins in this terrain. Kenji needed no further encouragement. He kicked open his door and rolled out, immediately sprinting for the tree line as bullets chewed up the ground around him. His mechanical expertise told him what headquarters had refused to acknowledge. These trucks were designed for urban combat and flat terrain, not jungle warfare against an enemy with air superiority and elevated firing positions. Daiichi hesitated, his training warring with his survival instinct. The young private looked at the burning vehicles ahead, heard the screams of wounded comrades, and finally threw himself from his truck. He ran with everything he had, his boots slipping on loose gravel as he dove into the undergrowth, just as another explosion consumed the vehicle he had abandoned. The surviving crews evacuated in a chaotic scramble. Some men were cut down as they fled, but others made it to the relative safety of the jungle. The Americans continued firing at the abandoned vehicles, ensuring complete destruction of the convoy and its cargo. From his concealed position in the dense foliage, Takeshi watched the final truck succumb to the assault. 12 Type 1 Hoha armored trucks reduced to smoking scrap metal in less than 20 minutes. The supplies that could have sustained the Leh garrison for weeks now burned uselessly on a mountain road. The bitter truth crystallized in his mind as he counted his surviving men. The armor had not saved them. The design philosophy behind these vehicles was fundamentally flawed for Pacific theater operations. The trucks were too heavy for jungle bridges, too loud to avoid detection, too confined for the crew to escape quickly, and their armor was too thin to protect against modern anti-tank weapons, while being thick enough to create a false sense of security. "Captain, what do we do now?" Hiroshi whispered, crouched beside him. Blood ran from a cut above his eye where shrapnel had grazed him during the escape. Takeshi surveyed the 17 men who had made it to the rally point. "Out of the original convoy of 64 personnel, this was all that remained. We survived, Lieutenant, and when we return, I will write a report that headquarters can no longer ignore. These trucks are killing our men faster than the enemy ever could." The 17 survivors moved through the jungle for 3 days, surviving on emergency rations and rainwater collected in helmet liners. Takeshi led them south, avoiding established roads where American patrols would be hunting for stragglers. Each night he recorded observations in a waterproof notebook, documenting every tactical failure he had witnessed. On the 4th day, they encountered the remnants of another convoy. Captain Masao Fujiwara and 12 men from a supply run that had departed 2 weeks earlier. Their story was identical. Ambushed on a narrow road, Type 1 Hoha trucks destroyed systematically. Only those who abandoned vehicles quickly had survived. Masao's weathered face showed the strain of command decisions that resulted in losing most of his men. "We were told the armor would protect us," he said bitterly, sitting beside a small fire. "Instead, it made us slow, loud, and trapped us when we needed to escape." The two groups combined forces for the return to Rabal. During the long march, Takeshi interviewed every survivor, gathering testimony about the Type 1 Hoha's failures. Kenji provided technical analysis of the design flaws. Young Daiichi, who had nearly died in his first mission, spoke of the psychological trap created by false security. They reached Rabal on March 28th, exhausted and reduced to ghosts of the men who had departed 13 days earlier. Major Saito met them at the compound entrance, his expression grave. He had already received reports of the convoy's destruction through other channels. "Captain Yamamoto, you will submit your after-action report immediately." Takeshi stood at attention despite his exhaustion. "Major, I request permission to expand the report beyond standard format. What happened to my convoy is happening across every supply route in the theater. The Type 1 Hoha program is fundamentally flawed." That evening, Takeshi worked through the night compiling data from multiple sources. He obtained records from other failed convoys, interviewed survivors from previous missions, and consulted with Kenji on technical specifications. The report grew to 37 pages, methodically documenting why 90% of convoys using Type 1 Hoha trucks were being destroyed. The armor thickness was insufficient against modern weapons, but heavy enough to reduce mobility. The trucks could not traverse damaged bridges or muddy jungle roads. Their engines were too loud for tactical surprise. The enclosed design made rapid evacuation nearly impossible under fire. Most critically, they were being employed in terrain and tactical situations completely different from their original design parameters. Hiroshi assisted with the compilation, adding intelligence reports about American anti-convoy tactics. The enemy had learned to target these trucks specifically, knowing they carried the most valuable supplies and that their destruction would cripple Japanese logistics. When Takeshi finally presented the completed report to Major Saito, the older officer read it in silence for over an hour. His expression shifted from skepticism to troubled acceptance. "This report could end careers, Yamamoto." "Including mine." "Including yours," Takeshi met his gaze steadily. "Sir, it could also save lives. Hundreds of them." Major Saito forwarded the report up the chain of command with his full endorsement, a decision that required considerable courage given the military culture that viewed criticism of approved equipment as bordering on insubordination. The document reached the desk of Colonel Hideaki Watanabe at Southern Army Headquarters in Singapore within a week. Colonel Watanabe was a pragmatist, a rare trait in the increasingly desperate command structure of 1943. He had seen too many good men die due to poor equipment decisions made by officers who never left Tokyo. He ordered an immediate investigation and Zawanda Takashi to Singapore for direct testimony. The hearing took place in a sweltering conference room on April 15th. Present were logistics officers, vehicle designers from Hino Motor Company, and senior command staff. Takeshi presented his findings with clinical precision, supported by testimony from Kenji Masao and other convoy survivors. The Hino representatives initially defended their design, arguing that the trucks performed excellently in Manchuria and China. Takeshi countered with maps showing the fundamental differences between those theaters and the Pacific jungle environment. Kenji provided devastating technical testimony. The Type 1 Hoha weighs 8 tons fully loaded. Most bridges in New Guinea cannot support that weight. The ground pressure causes the vehicles to bog down in mud that lighter trucks navigate easily. The armor adds weight without providing meaningful protection against weapons the Americans are actually using. Young Daiichi, nervous but determined, described the psychological impact. We trusted the armor to protect us, so we stayed with the vehicles longer than we should have. When I finally abandoned my truck, 3 men behind me hesitated. They died because they believed the armor would save them. The turning point came when Colonel Watanabe presented casualty statistics his staff had compiled. Convoys using Type 1 Hoha trucks had a 92% loss rate. Convoys using lighter, unarmored trucks that could move faster and disperse quickly had a 63% loss rate. The armored vehicles were actually increasing casualties. The room fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled officers. Within 2 weeks, new operational directives were issued. Type 1 Hoha trucks were to be reassigned to rear area security and urban garrison duties where their design was appropriate. Forward supply missions would use lighter, faster vehicles operating in smaller groups with greater tactical flexibility. Night movements were prioritized over daylight convoys. Air cover requests were elevated in priority. Takeshi received a commendation for his thorough analysis, though some officers viewed him as a troublemaker who had embarrassed the procurement system. Major Saito was quietly promoted and transferred to a training command. His willingness to forward critical reports noted favorably by Colonel Watanabe. Kenji was assigned to a vehicle modification program, adapting existing equipment for jungle operations. His practical expertise proved invaluable in improving survival rates. Daichi was promoted to corporal and became an instructor at the driver training school, teaching new recruits about tactical flexibility and when to abandon vehicles to save lives. The changes came too late to alter the war's outcome, but they saved lives in the months that followed. August 1945. The war ended with Japan's surrender, leaving the Pacific theater scarred and transformed. The men who had survived the failed convoy missions carried their experiences into a drastically different world. Captain Takeshi Yamamoto returned to his family home in Kyoto, finding it partially destroyed by American firebombing raids. His wife Akiko and their 2 daughters had survived by evacuating to the countryside. In the years that followed, Takeshi became a professor of logistics and supply chain management at Kyoto University. His lectures often referenced the Type 1 Hoha case study as a lesson in how organizational culture and flawed assumptions could multiply casualties. His wartime report, once classified, was eventually studied by military analysts from multiple nations. It became a foundational text on the importance of matching equipment design to operational environment. American military colleges used it as a teaching example of how even well-intentioned innovations could fail when applied incorrectly. Sergeant Kenji Matsuda survived the war and returned to his family's small automotive repair shop in Yokohama. His technical expertise, honed through years of military service, helped him rebuild the business into one of the most respected workshops in the region. He refused to work on military vehicles after the war, focusing instead on civilian transportation. His grandson later became an engineer at Toyota, carrying forward the family's mechanical legacy. In his final years, Kenji often reflected on the irony that the armor meant to protect had instead trapped so many young men. He kept a photograph of his old crew on his workshop wall, a reminder of those who never came home. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, completed his service, and entered the diplomatic corps during Japan's reconstruction. His wartime experiences, particularly witnessing Takeshi's courage in challenging flawed systems, shaped his approach to international relations. He became an advocate for transparent communication and evidence-based policymaking, rising to serve as an ambassador to Australia in the 1960s. Private Daichi Kobayashi returned to his family's rice farm in Osaka Prefecture. The young man who had trembled with fear in his first combat mission became a quiet, steady presence in his community. He married his childhood sweetheart, raised 4 children, and rarely spoke of the war. But every year on March 15th, he visited a small shrine and lit incense for the 47 men from his convoy who never came home. In 1987, at age 62, Daichi was interviewed by a documentary filmmaker researching Pacific War logistics. When asked what he learned from his experience, he replied simply, "Sometimes the protection we think will save us becomes the trap that kills us." The willingness to abandon what is not working, even at great cost, can be the difference between death and survival. The Type 1 Ho-Ha armored trucks remained a footnote in military history, a cautionary tale about the gap between design theory and battlefield reality. But for the men who survived those convoys, the lessons learned in fire and blood shaped the remainder of their lives, teaching them the true cost of institutional inertia and the value of courageous truth-telling in the face of catastrophic failure.